Now, our last speaker has been travelling the length and breadth of the country, discussing economics and how Labour's economic programme could need an end to cuts and austerity. He's been a great friend to Jeremy Corbyn and also a great explainer of a kind of politics that Labour wants to see in this country. We are chuffed to bits to have the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, John McDonnell.
Under strict instructions from Jeremy, we saw him earlier today. No jokes. Watch my language, especially around the word useless. And I'm not allowed to go anywhere near small red books. Let me tell you what I think we're experiencing at the moment, what we're watching. We're watching unfold before us an attempt at a very British coup. I think we've got to explain that to people and why it's happening. 17 months ago, some of you know this story, you've heard me tell this story before. 17 months ago, when we lost the general election, we were pretty despondent, absolutely despondent. I remember that Friday after the election itself. And to be frank, I wasn't sure where we were going to go next. Ed Miliband resigned. I liked Ed Miliband, to be frank. I thought the way the media treated him was appalling, especially attacking his father. And I didn't want him to resign. I wanted him to hold on. I didn't want him to go. I wanted him to stay at least for a while until we'd settle things down and looked at where we were going to go. And to be frank, I was looking for a slow drift into a retirement where I could sit at the back of halls like this, complaining why they never made me leader and where it's all gone wrong, because they never listened to me. And what then happened is that we had a lot of pressure from the left, from different organisations and some trade unions to field a candidate for the leader of the Labour Party. And so you'll know this story. Jeremy and I convened a number of meetings of the left and organisations to explain to them that there was no way that we could run a candidate, no way we could get a candidate on the ballot paper, and there's no chance of us winning. Do not take racing tips from me and Jeremy. And then what happened, some of you know this story, I convened a meeting in the Socialist Campaign Group, and we said we're going to have to run a candidate, who should it be? And we went around the table, and I said, well, I've done it twice, I was so popular I couldn't even get on the ballot paper. Diane said she'd done her bit, and that was enough. She did reasonably well, but she took that experience. And Jeremy sat at the end of the table, so we all looked at him and said, well, it's your turn. And he said, go on then. Again, I tell that story because actually that's the sort of leader I want. Someone who actually is devoid of personal ambition, but out of principle commitment to the movement, is willing to put his name forward. Because I've been in Parliament now nearly 20 years, and I've worked with lots of people who come into Parliament with on the back of the envelope in their back pocket is the date, the age they were going to become an MP, the age that they'd become a minister, then the age they'd become Prime Minister. And to be frank, I do not want to go back to leaders whose ambition overrides all principle. And that's why it was significant. We then went down to get the nominations to get them on the ballot paper. We had to have 35, and that was tough. That was really tough. We had to persuade, cajole, offer to sleep with people. That didn't work. No offers. And we went round, and on the last 10 seconds before nominations closed, we had 4 people in front of us who had promised if we got to 34, they'd nominate, and we were at 33. In the last 10 seconds, Andrew Smith and Gordon Marsden, Andrew from Oxford, Gordon from Blackpool nominated him. And it was just wonderful. We were on the ballot paper. I just had to find Jeremy then to tell him he was the candidate. He'd gone for a cup of tea. What we then did, and some of you know this because you were involved in it, is that we then said, look, we'll tour around the country, meeting after meeting, because what this will give us is the opportunity to explain our ideas. Jeremy said, come on, we'll do that together. And you know this joke, because I said, don't be daft, it looked like last of summer wine on tour. And I said, look, let's get around there. If we put our ideas across, I thought at that point in time, we could display maybe about 30-35% of vote in the polls, and then we could start negotiating the left back into position, into shadow cabinet, that sort of thing. So it was a negotiating strategy initially. And I said I'd chair his campaign. We did the usual thing, book rooms. I said, don't book any room bigger than 100 and make sure the chairs are those that you can pull one side, because if only 20 people turn up, it'll look full. And we did the first meeting, 100 chairs, 500 people turned up. Next meeting, pushed it to 500, 1,000 turned up. And it just went on like that. He did 100 meetings around the country and talked to tens of thousands of people. And some of you know, I give the example of that Redbridge Momentum meeting that we had. 2,000 people in the hall, another couple of thousand outside, and we had the FBU fire engine, and Jeremy dressed the crowd outside for the FBU fire engine. There's a film of it, and the significance of that film is that there's two young people filmed breaking into a political meeting rather than breaking out. And it's just, for me, it showed that something different was happening. And what was happening is we were having those meetings, Jeremy's having speeches, we had a range of speakers on as well, but more importantly than that, people were turning up and they were explaining their life experiences. And our political programme that we campaigned on came from that direct engagement in that discussion. So when people turned up, as they did in the meetings in Liverpool in particular, and said, we're living in slums still in the year 2015. In my constituency, I repeat it, Jackie Connors here, who works with me in my constituency, there'll be 200 families tonight in my constituency sleeping in bed and breakfast because they're homeless classified. There'll be others sleeping in beds in sheds, garages rented out to them. There'll be people sleeping along the Grand Union Canal in our parks. And we've reinvented the back-to-back, where the front of the house is rented to one family and the back of the house is rented to another. And average rents, I don't know what it's like here, average rents in my constituency now is between £1,400 and £1,600 a month. Staggering homelessness crisis that we've not seen since the Second World War. So we said very, very simply, the solution is what? We build council houses again. We build them in large numbers again. But also, I tell you, also in places like London, we've said we're going to build 1 million new homes, but half of them council houses. My view is that we'll aim actually for 1 million council houses in due course. And we'll do it. But it takes time to build homes. So in the meantime, what we don't want is families or individuals, young people in particular, exploited by high rents. So we'll reintroduce rent control. We want fair rents in this country. I'm old enough to remember when we had fair rents administered by the local authority with a fair rent officer. That takes place right the way across Europe in capital cities. If it can be good enough for Paris and Berlin and elsewhere, it should be good enough for here. And also, to be frank, there are 700,000 properties empty, standing empty in this country. Half of them empty for more than 6 months. So we want to give councils the powers and the resources that where there's a property standing empty for a long period and there's a homelessness family, we put the homeless family in the empty property. It's a social crime for properties to stand empty while there are homeless families. That came out of those discussions. The issue around the NHS was brought up time and time again in the meetings that we had. Exactly as we've heard tonight. The creeping privatisation, the pressure that workers are under. So the solution for us was straightforward. Alison Pollock brought forward a bill to Parliament, which Jeremy and I signed up to. And it was straightforward. It was to scrap the last legislation under the Tories and to end all privatisation in the NHS itself. There was controversy in the shadow cabinet, some of which was reported in the media, which was unfortunate. It was unfortunate we had people leaking our own shadow cabinet at the time. And the controversy was about Jeremy and I going on the picket lines for the junior doctors. Let me make this absolutely clear. The junior doctors take industrial action again. We will be back on those picket lines. Time and time again, which was about low pay, insecure jobs, right the way across the country. The Tories boast about this massive increase in jobs, the amount of unemployment fall even today. A lot of that is about the creation of self-employment, false self-employment through umbrella companies and elsewhere, but also forced self-employment, where people are working in underemployed work, so not enough hours in the week to earn a decent living. But also it's low-paid, insecure employment that's being developed under this Tory government. And why is that? Well, it stems right back to the 1980s, when Thatcher introduced the anti-trade union legislation that sought to destroy the very existence of trade unions in this country. And part of that was the Trade Union Act that the government introduced and carried only recently. So what we said very, very clearly in the discussions of the campaign last year and this year, we will ensure that we scrap the anti-trade union legislation, and in the first 100 days of a new Labour government, we will scrap the Trade Union Act that this government introduced. This is not revolutionary. We simply want any future government to abide by the International Labour Organisation's conventions. We simply want to bring trade union rights in this country to the same level as those across Europe. It's hardly revolutionary. In fact, it's one of those basic human rights that we should all aspire to. We had teachers turn up and talk about the pressure that they were under. 50,000 teachers having left the profession. 6,000 vacancies on teacher training courses because of the combination of pressure of work, the insecurity of the work that they are employed in, and also the creeping privatisation of our education service with the forced academy programme that the government has threatened. So we said very, very clearly that we would oppose the forced academy process, and actually we defeated the Tories in Parliament to do that. Although young people turned up at those meetings, there were students who not only were suffering as a result of the threatened debt that they would be under, but also many of them now who are working not during holidays or the summers, whatever, but working long hours themselves in jobs to survive during term time. It's interesting, some of the reports that are coming out now about the number of students dropping out, those that are deterred from going to university, and others not getting the grades they were expected to get because of the pressure they're under and the work now that they're having to do just to survive, to earn the income. So what Jeremy announced last weekend I think was important, because when we go back into government, I think yes, we'll remember the Attlee government for the forming of the National Health Service and Bevan. For I think we'll remember the Corbyn government and Angela Rayner when she goes in our Secretary of State for Education for founding the National Education Service. Education is not a commodity to be bought and sold. It's a gift from one generation to another. So we will introduce in the next Labour government free education from cradle to grave. Free child, free school, free institution. Scrapping tuition fees, and if we can do it through various financial measures, yes, we'll be lifting the debt off students as well. All of those policies came out of the discussions that we had in that campaign and that we've sought to develop as an administration. But one of the key things that's been mentioned tonight, it is about how you create an equal society. How do you ensure that people are not discriminated against? People have rights, and that actually we ensure that our public services to respond to those rights. That's why we looked at a whole agenda for different aspects of our society, how we can bring forward legislation, but also how we can invest in those community organisations, particularly through local government, but in the third sector as well, to make people have a voice within our society. So we had a democracy agenda. One of the things that John Tricker was working on and was going to be launched before this coup started was that we'd have a constitutional convention where we looked at forms of radical federalism around the country, where we looked, yes, at our voting systems as well, but also where we looked at how people were given a voice through support, whether they be women, LGBT, or whatever ethnic minority they were. But also how we stood up for those who were most vulnerable. And that's why I think it was important. It was absolutely significant, and it was mentioned here tonight, that the first act of Jeremy Corbyn after becoming leader, the first official act, was to go out into Parliament Square to that demonstration to say refugees are welcome here. What came out, and Sam has mentioned it. We've traditionally been a party of peace. We were formed as a party of peace. We were a party that's campaigned for peace over, well, the century in which we've existed. Let me say this about Tony Blair. I was involved in the Irish peace process, the discussions that went on. I come from a Republican background. And I just say this. I think what Tony Blair did with regard to Northern Ireland was heroic. And I will forever praise the work that he put in to bring all sides together, to negotiate a peace settlement, and to secure that peace settlement that actually ended the tragedy that was happening in the 6 counties. If it had stopped there, if it had just stopped there, I think his administration would be looked back in history as a momentous event in terms of developing peace processes that could be learned from across the world. And then Iraq happened. And Iraq happened, as you saw from the Chilcot report, because we had a government that was dominated by one individual and a small group, basically unaccountable to the larger party, the parliamentary party itself as well, largely unaccountable to the membership itself. So we said in this last year, through our democratic processes as a party, we will never allow that form of military aggression under the name of the Labour Party to ever happen again. And that programme, Jeremy got elected with the largest mandate from an individual membership vote of any political leader in our country. 59.5%. Our canvassers during the campaign, I kept on getting them to test the canvassing that we were doing, because I didn't believe them when they said we were going to get 60% of the vote. I'm a pessimist that far. I told them off afterwards, we only got 59.5%. He was elected on that mandate, and what he tried to do then is what other Labour leaders have done, put together a shadow cabinet of left, right and centre, bring people together, appoint people from across the political spectrum of the Parliamentary Labour Party, give them their responsibilities, give them their heads, say get on with your job, report in democratically when you can, we'll give you all the support we possibly can. And this idea that somehow he cut himself off from the Parliamentary Labour Party, he actually adopted the Harold Wilson approach, which is actually an open door policy to the Labour leader. In fact, people saw Jeremy more than any other Labour leader. This myth that somehow he was ensconced in his room, not meeting people, is laughable. Every Wednesday was an open door for anyone to walk through with any individual problems or any issues that they had. And we tried to hold the shadow cabinet together in that way. And you know, it wasn't working brilliantly, but it was working. And slowly but surely we were laying the foundations of the administration as we went on. But there is a coup going on. And it didn't start a month ago. The coup started during Jeremy's first speech when he was elected leader. During his first speech, if you watch the TV clips of it, whilst he's speaking, 2 minutes into his speech, across the bottom, helpfully of course the BBC and Sky, as they always support us in this way, were clicking across the names of people saying they were refusing to serve under Jeremy. That was with 2 minutes of it. And what we knew then, we're political artisans, we've been around a long while, what we knew then was that there's a hardened group of people who just could not accept his mandate. And yes, they started plotting even then. You can't watch my description. The plot was, as soon as we failed electorally, the plot was going to kick in. We knew that. We knew that because we had people at their meetings telling us that's what we're going to do. So the first plot was going to be triggered after the Oldham by-election. And we were going to lose dramatically in the Oldham by-election, and they were going to then move against us. Well, here's the funny thing. What happened was we had a brilliant candidate in Oldham called Jim McDonnell, a local candidate, combining the strength of a local candidate, democratically selected at the local level with local grassroots experience, with the enthusiasm that Jeremy brought to the party and all those new members, and yes, momentum bussing people in to help in the campaign. We didn't lose the Oldham by-election, we had a huge victory. So the plot was postponed. And the next time the plot was to be triggered, because we had people reporting from their meetings what the plot was all about, was the local government and the mayoral elections. Because we were going to lose them, and we were going to be demolished in the local government elections, and the plot would then come. Well, here's the funny thing, we won every mayoral election. Well, I tell you, the sweetest victory for me was Bristol. Marvin Rees, a black man, winning in the city that made its money through slavery. It showed for me actually just how far we've come in this country in terms of equality in that city. For the local council elections, all the councils we were supposed to lose, we held on to every one. And again, so the plot was off. So the next time they thought they'd do it was on the referendum. And what happened on the referendum? We campaigned for Remain but Reform. We met Hilary Benn and Andrew Regal back in September, Jeremy and I. They wanted to run the campaign. We said fine. They wanted to run it on an extremely Europhile campaign. We said actually that isn't going to work. What we've got to do is campaign to remain in Europe, but we've got to express our own views about the need for reform. Because to be frank, if you go beyond London, into the north in particular, the Brexit vote was building. We had to offer something about a new Europe that we could construct, that tackle some of the issues that were being raised, and then in that way, we could overcome some of the problems of mobilising that vote. And we were getting it in the neck from some of the left as well, who were campaigning for exit, talking about how the EU had treated Greece. So that's why I got Yanis Varoufakis across, touring round with me, to say I was a Greek finance minister and I still want you to remain within the EU. And Jeremy did all these criticisms of Jeremy not doing enough work. He did more meetings, more campaign than any other shadow cabinet member. He got squeezed out of some of the media because of the punch-ups within the Tory party itself. I think it's unfair to criticise him, and I tell you why. If you look at some of the people who are criticising him now, look at what happened in their constituencies. We also argued, to be frank as well, and this was controversial, that we should not appear on platforms with the Tories. Now the reason for that wasn't some minor sectarian spat or anything like that. The reason for that was that the lessons from Scotland is if you appear on with the Tories, you can all be classified as part of the establishment, the Westminster bubble, etc. And I found it ironic that you have Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage accusing us of being part of the establishment and being part of the Westminster bubble. But that was what they did up north, unfortunately, when people did appear with the Tories. I think it was detrimental to the campaign overall. Nevertheless, we worked hard and we lost it. And that triggered the coup. Interestingly enough, in days after losing, Jeremy was meeting with the Socialist and Social Democratic leaders from across Europe to talk about how we could retrieve the situation, to build a new Europe where we built upon the strengths of the EU but overcome some of the perceived disbenefits that we're seeing within this country, so we can maintain that relationship with Europe because we're internationals. But nevertheless, they came at us because of that, and what happened in the House of Commons, to be frank, was almost hysteria in terms of what happened. It was extraordinary. On the Saturday after Brexit occurred, we got contacted by the Observer, and we were told that Hilary Benn was phoning round members of the Shadow Cabinet urging them to resign to oust Jeremy. Jeremy eventually got hold of Hilary Benn at midnight that night. We couldn't track him down before then. At midnight said, "Is this true?" Hilary Benn said, "Yes." Jeremy said, "Well, look, pull back from there. You don't have to resign. Withdraw from that. We can talk about it and resolve it." Hilary refused. The Jeremy administration had no other way but to sack him. And that's what he did. Now, one of us likes that sort of thing. It's certainly not Jeremy. He doesn't like conflict in that way. If you like, he's a conflict resolver as best he can. But what then happened is that the plan was that a number of them would resign. 4 of them would then resign. And we'd stabilise the situation by putting people in their position, then another wave would resign. And so for 48 hours, we had people resigning in waves, deliberately to destabilise the administration, and in that way they thought that they'd undermined Jeremy's own morale and that he would resign. I tell you, they underestimate this man on every occasion. We went to the Parliamentary Labour Party meeting, and I've described it elsewhere, and I'll describe it. It was more like a lynch mob than a meeting. People were getting up, it was abusive, we get up time and time again. Someone said, "You're a nice bloke, Jeremy, but you're never going to win an election, you're not a leader," all this sort of stuff. The irony of all that, at that Parliamentary Labour, this argument that you can't win elections, here's the irony. At that Parliamentary Labour Party meeting, the first item on the agenda was to welcome the candidate from Battersea who just tripled their majority. We can't win elections on the UK. And this argument that you're not a leader, well, Jeremy's not a leader in the traditional style. And it's not what I want. I don't want another Blair. I don't want another leader. I want someone who's honest, who's principled, who's open, what you get is what you see, and someone we can all place our trust in. And I think that's what people see in Jeremy. That picture of him last week, sitting down on the floor of a railway carriage, having a cup of tea. They say, "No, it was just for publicity." That's Jeremy. He sat there and he wouldn't go into a first-class carriage, he wouldn't pay the additional money, he wanted to be, just as he has always been, just an ordinary bloke amongst our own class, not in any way assuming the airs of a leader or an MP. That's the sort of leader that I want. But you know, this coup isn't about Jeremy. This has nothing to do with Jeremy. This coup is about you. How dare you, the establishment says, how dare you elect a socialist as the leader of the Labour Party? That's what you elected someone who wants to transform this society. What we want to do is radically transform our society. So it's fairer, radically more democratic, radically more equal. And it's based upon, yes, a prosperous society, a growing prosperous economy that is economically but also environmentally sustainable. But where that prosperity is shared by all. Now that's a huge threat to the establishment. That's why they're coming at you and me and Jeremy and all of us. Because they want a Labour leader in the old tradition, where you make loud noises, but do very little and can be easily incorporated. They want to return to politics as normal, which is whatever political party is in power, it's simply a rotation of the elites. That's what they want. So that's why This is the 1% telling us, the 99%, to get back in our place. And by our votes, we can tell them, not only are we not going back into our place, we're coming further. We're going to re-elect Jeremy as a socialist leader of the Labour Party, and we're going to do that to enable him to work with us as a mass social movement of over 500,000 members, aiming to be 1 million members, to transform our society in every community that we operate in and work in. Now, they've done everything they possibly can the last few weeks. We had Michael Foster trying to take a legal action to prevent Jeremy being on the ballot paper. Well, Michael Foster, a rich donor, tried to prevent 500,000 people having a vote. And we beat him in the courts on that. And I see he's described, and I don't know whether you've seen the article, he's described members of Momentum as Nazi stormtroopers. I find it unfortunate that language has been used, but it'll be interesting to see what the compliance unit does to a wealthy person. Then at the NEC meeting, when Jeremy, we won the vote to get him on the ballot paper, at that NEC meeting, people left, they thought the business was over. We had a couple of people go on their trains, one to Runcorn, another, as her husband's disabled, has to be fed on a regular basis. What then happened was that the General Secretary laid around a paper. There was nothing on the agenda, laid around a paper saying that they would have a freeze date back in January. 14 people voted for that. So 14 people excluded 140,000 people from voting. And we're supposed to be a democratic party. It was a disgrace. And what happened is, as you know, a number of people, individuals, went to court, 5 of them, and they won, and we got overturned by the appeal court on a judgment which I found bizarre, but not unusual in the appeal court. What we have now then is the election goes ahead. I find it amazing as well, I have to say, if we are having an election, I just find it extraordinary that in the year 2016, I don't think we should have an election, I don't think we need it, but if they're going to have one, we have a ballot paper without a woman's name on it. Don't you find that extraordinary? In 2016, this is not 1916, and what happened was the Owen Smith supporters forced Angela Regal off the ballot paper itself. I didn't support Angela Regal's stand, I didn't support Owen Smith's stand. I don't want a leadership election. But if you're going to have one, you might as well make sure it's representative of the wider society that we're supposed to represent. And what happens now is that the hustings are taking place. We're asking for a friendly, a comradely debate. Now, last year, Jeremy had 41 different hustings, 100 meetings, and all through that period, with all the candidates, both leader and deputy leader, it was amicable, it was comradely. And at the end of it, I was in the green room when they come forward with the results. There was lots of tears, especially there was lots of hugs as well. We came out of it, believe it or not, as comrades. It was an amicable, friendly debate throughout. That isn't the case at the moment. It's becoming extremely personalised, some of the attacks on Jeremy, both in terms of the media and also from the Owen Smith camp. And I regret that. So what we're saying to them, we don't expect the media to change colours. To be frank, the BBC has been appalling. Some of you may have seen the recent report about the bias in the BBC, or the LSE report about the bias in the press overall. And don't talk to me about the Guardian being a liberal newspaper. What we want to come out of this leadership election now is a comradely debate where we can set out our ideas, mobilise our membership, and I believe re-elect Jeremy Corbyn, but do it in a way in which we're preparing the ground for a general election. In which we set out that vision of society that we will create when we're elected, in which we maximise our membership in every community we possibly can, and in which we become a social movement in tune with the hearts and thinking of the population that we seek to represent. I think that's the challenge that we all face. We've got a responsibility on our shoulders. And I just urge you this. Don't believe anything the polls are saying about the election being won by Jeremy or anything like that. Don't be complacent. We need to ensure, because they've knocked off 140,000, mostly our supporters, we've got to ensure now that we mobilise every vote within the party we possibly can. We have a responsibility on all our shoulders to talk to every other party member you know, to talk to those affiliated members, the registered supporters, to make sure when those ballots come out next week, when they come through email or through the letterbox, that they're filled in promptly, they're returned, and they're returned to give Jeremy, I hope, not just the same majority as last time, but a bigger majority. When you vote, the question will be this: does the establishment control our party, or do we as ordinary members? I think it's we as ordinary members that have to tell them this time round, we control our party, it's our party, not theirs. And when they attack Jeremy Corbyn, they attack us. In fact, when they attack Jeremy Corbyn, we should make it clear, we're all Jeremy Corbyn. Thanks for all that you're doing in the campaign. Thanks for all you're doing in the wider community to recruit into the party. But I want to say a special thank you for Momentum supporters. They've come under a blitz of attack. Yes. They've had MPs make statements about them which are downright lies, traduce their reputations, and they've been accused of a whole range of crimes, basically, none of which have been perpetrated by Momentum members or supporters. So I just want to thank them for their courage and determination in seeing this campaign through. And if you are a Labour Party member, you support Jeremy Corbyn, I urge you, support Momentum and support our comrades in it. We need three things. We need three things. I say this on every speech I do now. Three things. One is determination. Absolute determination now that we're going to see this through, we're going to win this election, we're going to resolve the issues with the Parliamentary Labour Party, and we're going to form an administration and opposition that will take us into government. But you also need courage sometimes. Sometimes we're swimming against the stream. Look at the media coming at us all the time. Sometimes you just need courage to stand up for what's right. But above all else, we need, and some of you know this, the thing that we did, the secret we discovered a century and a half, 2 centuries ago in the Industrial Revolution, in the workshops and in the fields. We put it on our banners. Because unity is strength. Injury to one is an injury to all. Workers united will never be defeated. It's called solidarity. We need solidarity now on a scale that we've not experienced for maybe a generation. So courage and determination and solidarity, comrades. Solidarity.